Thanks for everybody who's joined us tonight for the next in our 2021 webinars. We're really excited to see you tonight. We're just a minute or so into this, and we'll just give a few people a little bit more time to jump on a Wednesday night. For those of you that have joined us before, you'll be fairly familiar with the format. I encourage you to make sure you've got a cuppa or glass of wine and sit back and enjoy the session. Just give everyone now another minute to start. Beware, please look, if you've been to many of these webinars and jumped onto plenty of these Zoom meetings, as we all have over the last 12 months plus now, you'll know that basically the important thing is here to make sure you get the volume up, make sure you're comfortable. We can't have any audio come through from any of our registered guests that are joining us tonight. We say that we don't want to be heckled. We know you wouldn't heckle us anyway. But yeah, we'll start in a moment. So that's wonderful. So look, thank you very much. We're very excited to have everyone join us tonight for the next in our webinar series for 2021. And tonight's an investor masterclass, and it's very specific. It's about growing a winning portfolio. Such a great topic. We're very excited to bring this and talk to a lot of people. We've had a very high demand of people who have joined us and registered for tonight's webinar. So thank you for taking out the time to join us tonight. I'm very excited to have with me tonight the Managing Director, Sam Khalil from DPN. Sam, good evening.
Good evening, David. Great to be with you all again. So thanks for this opportunity.
Wonderful. And also I've got another one of our founding directors, Lloyd Thomas, who has held webinars with us before individually, but I've got the two big guns together. Lloyd, how are you tonight?
Yeah, great, David. How are you going? All right?
Yeah, fantastic. And it's great that you can join us. So we're looking forward to that.
And so just importantly, David, yes, that Lloyd isn't actually bigger than me in real life. So
yes,
that image there is a bit misleading.
Yes, I am. Yes, I am. It's true life stuff. You're a puppet.
And if you put my photo to it, I'd barely reach up to your shoulders, and that'd be for purpose. That's fantastic. So look, we're going to kick off before we get into the content of the discussion points, and it is a great topic tonight. Just want to remind everybody that this is certainly not financial advice. This is education. This is about empowering you, giving you insight, giving you inspiration to essentially join our webinar, learn about the topic of property investment. And tonight, certainly we want everybody to make sure that you do have that specialist team, and that specialist team of a property strategist, an accountant, a mortgage broker, there's proper solicitors, etc., to help you make the right informed choices. All of the research pieces we talk about tonight, we have an in-house research team at DPN. We're very fortunate, and it's one of the things that makes us different, but we do use independent research sources such as CoreLogic and Residex and government agencies as well. So that's where we get the background from, but that's just the start, if you like, or the premise of where we'll start with tonight's content. We always love to start with a quote, and tonight's one is from the famous American capitalist, if you like, Warren Buffett. Many people may have heard of, but this is a really, really pertinent one for us. Never depend on a single income. Make investments to create the second source. And it's just simple, and it really is a really strong premise, and it's certainly one of the things that we hold true to when we're talking to our customers. And I guess that probably kicks me in to start talking to you, Sam, straight away. When you think about this type of quote and the dealings you have with clients day in, day out, what does this actually look like for you in terms of the message that you're talking to our clients about?
Yeah, thanks, David. It's a great quote. And I just want to focus on the second word of that quote, which is depend. Never depend. And essentially what we always talk to people about is financial independence, which means I'm not depending on somebody else for an income stream. So, Warren Buffett's one of the world's greatest investors and very principled and has what we call a high EQ. He never would sit there and listen to radios and the media and that. He would make value-based judgments in investing. And so, even in my background as a financial planner, I started 25 years ago, so 2.5 decades in financial services. And, we always talk to people about what's their retirement plan. And we shifted that vernacular and went for financial independence because, your usual retirement age is 67. And, what we want to do is help people become financially independent, which could be well before the official retirement age. And And financial independence can mean a lot of things for people. And that really is just, again, I'm not depending on what you would call your personal exertion income, meaning, I might have trained for a specific, profession, and I have to exert my energy to generate an income. So I'm depending actually on myself. So financial independence is where I'm not depending on myself anymore. I'm depending on my investments that are now making me financially independent. And I can take then the choice to either completely stop exerting myself or partially exerting myself doing part-time work or doing volunteer or philanthropic work. And that's really the aim here, is to help people become financially independent, not dependent on themselves. And we actually don't see ourselves as actually a financial services company, David. You can see our core purpose as an organization is for people to live the life they want. That's our catch cry. That's why we exist as a company. And, getting people investment properties, home loans, whatever it may be, it really comes down to one thing, and that is lifestyle. How do we help you live that life now while you're exerting yourself and building a portfolio? And then at some point in the future, you swap places and you can generate that passive income. And that passive income, when I started, David, 25 years ago, was a lot of people say, I want $1,000 a week, but look, that's about $50,000 a year or so, but it really isn't cutting it these days. When you think of the cost of registering your car, going out to eat, and a lot of people are accustomed now to a very different quality of life. And so that's really at a basis these days, I'm finding it as we speak to a lot of people, can measure it to their household income, what they're getting is closer to a minimum of about $1,500 a week or $75,000 a year. So for most people to live the life they want, both now and in the future, they're looking at about a net income of about $75,000 a year or $1,500 a week. But a lot of people don't know what that looks like or what the portfolio is they need to achieve it.
Very
really
true.
Interesting, Sam.
It gives you choice when you actually get to that point. That's what it does.
Fantastic. And I think that really leads into, some really interesting statistics around what it looks like for Australians that are building retirement wealth, Sam, this key fact here.
Yeah, and to that point, so as I said to you about that 75,000, so, here 84,000, this stat here, and I think this is from the ABS, is only 4% of Australians actually generate over $84,000 a year as an income. So that is a clear indicator that a lot of people don't, 96% don't do that. And why don't do that? I would say to you, it's probably the number one thing is that those people that achieved that had a strategy, they had a plan, they had an idea what they needed to achieve. And we're going to see that in some other stats as well. But just to sort of frame what that looks like here, for you to replace yourself, to generate an income, to have a portfolio that generates, say, $80,000 a year, today, if you stop working today, you would need a $2 million portfolio above and beyond your home, because you're not living in your home. Sorry, you're living in your home, you're not generating income off your home. So if you had $2 million in investment assets, whether it be property, shares, super, whatever it is, $2 million, and you're generating a 4% net return worth of income, that's $80,000 a year. But, unfortunately, the cost of living goes up over time. And in 20 years' time, you're going to probably look at needing double that. You'll need about a $4 million portfolio generating 4% or $160,000 a year, which will be the same as $80,000 a year. So just to contextualize that, if you look at most people's savings or their net worth above and beyond their home, 4 million's a long way if that's what they're looking for, around the 20 million mark. Now, everyone's at different ages and stages of life, but I'm just using some averages here. And why is that? Because, if you go to buy a coffee in 20 years' time, you'll be paying about $9 for it. Or a pizza will cost you $50 instead of $20, $25 and that. And so it sounds a little bit crazy, but I was in Scandinavia 18 months ago, and that's what I was paying for a coffee. It was $10, and it wasn't great coffee, so it was quite painful. But if you can get your head around the fact that, in the future, you'll be paying more than that. And also, that's when you may stop working, but you've got to also account for something else, which is called life expectancy. And a lot of people may stop working these days or become financially independent, let's say 60 now as an average. But life expectancy for men is 89 years of age, and for women, it's 91 years of age. So you're now going to factor in another 3 decades of existence, and the cost of living continue to increase. So can you imagine then, maybe you're 80 and still quite healthy and what have you, and you go buy a cappuccino, it's going to cost you $20. It bends your head, but if you went back 30 or 40 years ago, what did, a pie cost you or what have you. You know,
Well, when I went to school, Sam, I remember a pie cost 12 cents. So there you go.
That's Lloyd, that was great. And that's when they first invented the motor car too, right?
That's exactly right. Literally, we were celebrating 2 years of electricity.
Excellent. All right. So there we go, David. So
that's excellent, Sam.
Just to frame it, you need a portfolio of substantial size to generate the income, but you can't calculate it on today's value. You really got to calculate it for a future value, but it also has to be of certain size to allow for growth as well into the future when you do stop working, because you will live for a number of decades thereafter.
That's very
Absolutely.
true.
Absolutely.
Actually, there was a report out in the Australian Financial Review, I think it was a couple of years ago, and it said 82% of Australians will outlive their super because they don't strategize. They don't plan anything. Yeah, it is. It's crazy.
Yeah, really scary numbers with that. And you know, talking about numbers, when we look at the actual property investment market, a staggering number of people today call themselves property investors, Sam.
Yeah, and look, you know, as I've been doing this for a number of years, and as I show people some of the stuff that we show them, where they generate quite substantial returns and cash flows, one of the things people say back to me, this seems too good to be true. Why isn't everyone doing it? I say, well, look, not everyone is doing it, but there are 2.2 million Australians doing it. And if you take children out of the equation, you know, and maybe some elderly folk that are retired, it's actually a substantial number of people who are investing in property, David, at 2.2 million. But that's not the stat I really would like to focus on. It's the other two that are really important. 6% of investors have 3 investment properties or more in their portfolio. And so let's just focus on that for a second. So if you go back to what we just talked about on the previous slide, is that you need a portfolio around 4 million. You can see that it's not one property that's going to cut it. Now, if you went back a generation, my parents, you know, they were first generation ethnic coming here to Australia. They worked really hard, not so smart. Their goal was to buy their home, pay it off entirely, get $100,000 in the bank and collect the pension. Now, they succeeded entirely in that. They were diligent, they got there. And I remember my mum and dad, they bought their house in southern Sydney for $80,000 in 1982. The house is worth 20 times that now. So you can, you know, that you wouldn't have believed it back then. But had they been smart enough and just bought the neighbour's house as well, a couple of years after, the $80,000 investment would be worth, you know, 1.6 million today. And the rent that they'd be generating would almost be equal to the value of the property back then. So just give you some context of what they could have done. But the next shift, the next generation, or some people even in that generation, shifted and sort of said, I just want to get my house, but I want to get one investment property. And there was a number of people who did that. But however, what we're seeing now is some people that are, you know, with the prevalence of greater access to information, a number of people in our industry and promoting the fact that, you know, you've got to prepare, people are now beginning to realize they need a portfolio. So you want to be in that 6% or on your way to that 6% of having a portfolio of properties. Because if you need, you know, somewhere between 2 to 4 million in assets and net position, you do need more than one property, because one property is not going to get it. Now, I just want to focus then on the third statistic there, which is 60% use negative gearing, which really shows you almost two thirds of the population are losing money on their property investment with the hope that they'll make it back in capital growth. And, you know, what I've, as I said, when I first started in this industry and working at it, everyone wanted to be negative geared. And that was, I guess, the key driver. Get your tax return, and get some money back from the government, what have you. But as we said in this, they're actually losing money in the process, hopefully making it back in the capital gain. And, you know, we're going to unpack this a little bit further, but it's really important that we don't want to be in that category that are just hoping to make it back in the capital gain in the future. We want to still get the capital gain, but is there a way we're not totally reliant on the capital gain, but we're getting both a positive income? Or if I look at it as Warren Buffett would, is are we making a business decision? Because he says you never go out of business making a profit, but you do go out of business if you're losing money, and there's a higher chance of doing that. So some good stats. The way we want to contextualize those stats is that A, we want to have a portfolio of properties, and B, we want to be profitable in our investments all the way, both now and in the future.
Yeah, that's really sensible, Sam. And you know, those stats are quite significant that we've looked at tonight. And I really want to now start to get into some of the meatier questions around the context of it.
Actually, David, I do apologize. I want to just go back to that point again, because I did forget one thing, and that's around the negative gearing. And this is what I do want to ask people if they've thought about negative gearing is that what happens when you stop working and you don't have the ability to offset your losses against your income? So again, you will to actually realize something, you have to sell your property. You've got to kill the golden goose. So the negative gearing strategy is so reliant on your property is making a loss. I can offset that loss against the profit I'm making on my personal income. And so that's where that strategy begins to become a little bit riskier, is that how are these properties actually going to pay you that $75,000 a year if they're losing money and you're actually propping them up? It's not, they are now dependent really on you versus you becoming dependent on them. So I just wanted to articulate that a little bit further and not gloss over that, because it's great while you're working, but what happens when you stop? Your property is still dependent on you, and the only way you can live off that is to sell and pay a sensible capital gains bill, and then reinvest again and pay stamp duty and what have you to re-weight your portfolio. So sorry to jump in there, David, but I just wanted to really highlight the nuance of being aware of just having a pure negative geared approach in investing in property.
I think that's really important, Sam. And for those that have seen before, we've done specific sessions around gearing strategies, and we could potentially revisit that gear, because there is a lot to uncover with that whole piece there. And I think, that does tie very much into the next piece. And as I was saying, I'm very keen to hear from Lloyd on this. I know you're very passionate about this, Lloyd, around what you see as that fundamental question around that investment return, Lloyd.
Yeah, look, I think that's absolutely true, David. And, one of the things that I say to people all the time is it's not about just buying a property, it's actually buying the right property. Because like Sam was saying in talking about it before, if the property is actually leveraging against your income, the question there you've got to ask yourself, is it an asset or a liability? All right, because if it's not funding itself, whether you're dead or alive, really, it is actually a liability. And so the things that we've got to look at when we're actually buying property is, okay, as it says there on the screen, you've got two types of properties that you want to get, or two types of return from that particular property, either capital growth or income. And most people go, like Sam was saying, with the negative gearing approach, is going for a capital growth strategy, where I say, look, imagine if you could have your cake and eat it too. And have both those kind of opportunities within the one property, and that's what we really focus on. And what if you could have both of them? Because that gives you a true asset. And one of the things that I often say to people is, imagine if you wanted to go to the Bahamas, well, before COVID, but if you want to go to the Bahamas for 12 months, what would happen to your property if you did not earn a cent here in Australia? Okay, is your house an asset or a liability? Is your investment property an asset or a liability? And but if you set up a true asset, a property that is actually going to give you cash flow and growth, it actually is truly an asset that's going to grow while you're away on through cash flow and through capital growth.
Fantastic, Lloyd. And I think really from here, it's really now to start to go in a bit more of a deep dive around having that cash flow positive strategy. Really, what do you see as the fundamental advantages of that for people?
Look, I think it's pretty practical. Obviously, people can go out and buy a new car if they want to, or, increase their lifestyle. Or if you're strategic about your approach to your investments, if you have your own home, one of the things that we talk about is your number one goal by buying that asset, which is your investment property, is to generate that income and bring and direct it back into paying off your own home loan. All right, because your home loan's not tax deductible, your investment property is. Okay, the loan on your investment property is. So, obviously directing that money straight back against your own home loan. If you don't have your own home and you're a rent investor, where you might rent and have investment properties like a lot of our clients do, you would actually pay that debt down as quick as you possibly can on your investment property by, maybe sitting it in your offset account. And there's strategic approaches that we look at with regards to that as well. But the approach there is get it down as quick as possible, get that debt down as quick as possible, so you create as much equity, because then you can actually maybe go out and get another one. Because if you're picking up between $10,000 and $15,000 a year in cash flow from one property, and we actually help you get another one, what happens there? You know, you're starting to make between $20,000 and $30,000. That's actually a life-changing amount, and that's after tax too. You know, that's net in your hand, and you sort of think, okay, how many extra hours a week would you have to work in your current job to generate an extra $20,000 to $30,000 a year in the hand? And so,
yeah, it's really powerful, Lloyd. I think, you know, as we've talked about, it's like, what does it mean in terms of getting that pay rise for that amount of money, right? That's really significant. It is life changing. And I think one of the other key things here that we often see with customers, and I'm really keen to hear your view on this, Lloyd, with the work with you do with customers, is about how the finance factor can work with them around a cash flow positive, can help them around their servicing for loans and funding, etc.
Look, it's absolutely true, David. It definitely makes a difference. I had a couple come to the office a couple of years ago, and they bought a property office, but they'd already been to their bank, and their bank had serviced them. They were a young couple. She didn't work, he worked, and they had a couple of kids. Their servicing from their sister that actually worked for the particular bank was $373,000 that they could afford. All right, we ended up getting a property worth $620,000. It was generating $850,000 $850 a week in cash flow, and so they were able to get that simply because of the extra cash flow that property was bringing in as a dual income property. And so yeah, they actually just recently sold it to buy their own home, and they sold it for $800,000, and so that was a pretty good return for a couple of years' work.
Yeah, that's really important.
And I just want to add to that, David, is that, and I think, again, the slide perfectly summarizes that as the portfolio advantage. So if you have determined that and understand that you need to build a portfolio, and just as Lloyd said, it's not just to getting one property, and you need to buy 2 or 3 properties. One of the biggest challenges we face in our clients face is that it's not that the properties cost them anything, they're actually making the money. So they want to get as many as they can. And your limitation is often the bank. They yes. do have equity, and they can't service. So having properties that have high yields actually increase your chances of being able to service for your second and third property. So it's not about your first property, it's about the second and the third one. So if you choose the right properties, they help you when you come to go back to the bank to get that, try to get that loan approved, because that is actually probably our biggest inhibitor. It isn't people's desire or will or knowledge or enthusiasm to do it. They're fundamentally, most of our clients are limited by the artificial stress tests that are placed by the bank. So I actually even had an appointment with the client this afternoon. He's got 2 investment properties and then 1 in superannuation, 3, and he's going, when can I do the next one? And we did his servicing, and we just can't get him the next one. Even though his portfolio doesn't cost, it's making him money and reducing his home loan, he is held back predominantly by the average benchmarks. And this guy's fiscally responsible, and he's got 2 kids in a private school. So as soon as one of these kids finishes next year, he'll be able to do it, because even though he manages his books really well and everything like that, they say, these are the rules, you can't afford it, even though we know he can afford it, and that the properties that we could get him will only improve his affordability, generally speaking. But if you can think portfolio versus property, you want your properties, generating positive cash flow, because that's great for today, but it's also great for not only tomorrow as well, but it's also great for your discussions with lenders. So I just wanted to articulate that, because we are trying to talk about a portfolio here versus one transaction.
It either helps or hinders. That's it.
And that's fantastic. And all of that practical conversation leads into really some of the more meaty parts of what we want to talk about tonight, and some numbers. And we do have some numbers to go through, which Sam and Lloyd will talk through in some detail. So Sam says it all. What does it look like? How would someone go about getting that portfolio starting from scratch today?
Great, thanks, Dave. So again, we talk about these big numbers where you need to, have a $2 million, $4 million portfolio, or, all this amount of money. How's that possible? And so look, again, understand everyone's situation is different, and the number of people on this call are very different situations, each person. Some people be starting out, some people more advanced, but here's what you could sort of see as someone that might be in a typical suburb in Sydney, although a lot more suburbs in Sydney's value of homes are a lot more now. But let's say, they bought a house, a handful of years ago for about $800,000. That's worth $1.2 million. Their loan's $600,000. So they've got halfway ownership, $600,000. But the bank will let them access up to 80% of the value of the property. which would be 1,080,000. So if their loan is 600,000 and they have they can access up to 1,080,000, that means 480,000 of the equity in that property they could utilize towards additional purchases. Plus, also, if you know, often families or households or couples, you know, combine now. That, you know, superannuation has been legislated in Australia for a couple of decades now. So people's super has compounded considerably. I remember when, as I said, I started in this industry, people's super was at 30 or 40,000, and, you know, 70,000 as a couple and what have you. But as time has gone on, it is not uncommon now that a household super is, you know, the average is sitting at that $300,000 mark. So that becomes a sizable deposit. So you can then potentially speak to a accountant or a financial planner and use your superannuation via self-managed super fund to buy a property. So for a lot of our clients, we could get them these properties. We could get them 2 properties outside of super, accessing the equity in the home. So here's an example of one property at 820,000. It's a dual income property. It generates $18,000 after tax, after all expenses. Same thing with another one at, say, 760. And then one in superannuation could be done with a deposit that's probably almost half the value with the funds people have super, and that is cash flow positive, about 12,000 a year. So that portfolio, so someone with, you know, a sensible amount of equity in their home, about 400,000 or so, and, you know, the average amount in super could, and if their income supports it, could go buy 2 properties outside of super. And even the calculation for servicing for the property in super is done at a different level and a different way, because you've got such a hefty deposit. They could overnight have a portfolio of around about 2.16 or 2.2 million. But that portfolio today, and this is not because we're amazing, you know, when I started, rates were around about the 8 to 9%. Today, they're a third of that. So if we've got products we've engineered to get a high yield, and you've got rates that are low return, as I said, people were so happy with at the end of their working career when I started in financial services to get $1,000 a week. Well, today, starting from a standing start, they could have almost $900 a week just off this portfolio and positive cash flow. So, as Lloyd mentioned earlier, that is after-tax income. That pre-tax you would have to earn would be, for most people, around about the $80,000 mark. So this is well on your way to be financially independent. This is not dependent on you in any way. This is purely funded by the tenants in the properties, and even the tax return is so little because the yield is so high and the rates are so low. So in the 25 years I've been doing this, we have never had such a ripe environment to get these returns. And in fact, our biggest challenge at the moment is to get access to land and product, because the rates have been so low and there's been such strong government stimulus that you know just the general market has swallowed up these opportunities. Now it'll thaw out and there's opportunities beginning to emerge in that. But if you're in a position to do it, these next 3 to 5 years are some of the best years to catalyze a portfolio and get it going, because the low rates will stimulate housing growth. They will allow you to generate that positive cash flow. And you think again, you know, for everybody here, what would you do with that extra $45,000 a year? And there's a number of uses. I mean, you could improve your lifestyle, but if you want to be a little bit more diligent, you could smash off your home loan, or you could pay off investment debt if you're already well ahead in your home loan repayments. But what it does, it begins to create a compounding effect. And I think the next slide, David, can
actually, Sam, just on that, I was just going to say, the funny thing about that scenario there with $600,000 debt, if you had a 3% interest rate on your home loan, it's $18,000 a year you're paying interest. Okay, one of your investment properties is actually paying now the interest on your investment property. You know, and so you're actually already paying $18,000. So imagine if you just paid another $18,000, you're actually paying that second $18,000 purely off the principal of your housing loan.
It's a good point, because again, I sort of keep harking back to previous times, but people were okay to even invest and pay $100 towards their investment property.
Exactly right.
But how about now, when your investment property is paying almost $300 a week to you? That's fantastic. So some people usually would think again, I will wait till I pay off my home, then I will invest, or I'll wait till something happens, you know, in future, or when I'm not so busy in that. But what happens if you actually start now and your property pays you? Can you afford it? No, you don't have to afford it. It affords you. And just what Lloyd just pointed out there is so valuable that it can be an accelerator actually to help you pay off your home versus you, again, purely relying on your personal exertion. So here's a law that I always allude to, and I allude this not just in financial terms, but in running a business and even life in general. But like, when I think of staff, the law of amplification, I think, would I multiply the staff member by 100? And if I shudder, then I've got to ask myself some real questions. Or if I can multiply them more, I go, well, how do I get some more of this person working for us?
Don't worry, David. David, we'd multiply.
Dave, you're safe, mate. You're safe.
It's good to know, because it could have been a very short webinar otherwise.
By 50 at least.
We're going to clone you, David. But if you think again, multiply that return over time. And if you think about just the rental return there, a net yield of about 45,000 after expenses, and it increases by 2.5% over the next 15 years. You look at that income, it actually grows. And this is, again, assuming you're not paying any of the debt off the portfolio. But just as an income over the 15 years, you're generating close to another $800,000. So if you think of your average mortgage these days, this portfolio on its own would help wipe out the debt. The other part is, if we look at the other part of the equation we talk about is the capital growth. And if you look at there over 15 years, and let's assume a 5% capital growth rate, the portfolio would double, okay? Or come close to it. And if you think about then you've made here close to another $2 million in capital growth, along with the 800,000 you've made in cash flow. That 800,000, again, if it's applied against debt, is also compounding and making return. But let's assume you didn't. So you've made about 2.8 million purely by holding the portfolio. You average that at over 15 years, and that is generating, I think, my calculations earlier, $187,000 a year, or $15,000 a month. So have you seen those sort of stickers and things on polls that says, do you want to make $5,000 a month? And you think, oh, I can tell those things are a scam, or I've got to be in some form of network marketing. Well, you don't need to do any of that. Here's a way where if you could build a portfolio of about 2 or 3 properties, you could be generating $10,000 a month over a 15. Now, this is not doubling your money overnight, it's doubling it over a decade and a half. But you could be getting in both capital growth and in positive income, $10,000 to $15,000 a month as a return. That's outstanding. That's what some people earn, or more than what some people earn. So it is using the law of compounding interest and leveraging, using someone else's money to make a greater return. So this is not theoretical. It's something we do day in and day out. And Lloyd's going to unpack that for us in a moment, after we just have a look at one more slide. And that is sort of what type of properties to look at. And probably one of the biggest things we encounter when we're speaking with people is, and we're not averse to or just try to push one particular type of product, but what we have found that is very popular and people almost get addicted to is a dual income property, where you've got multiple incomes off the one property. And if, again, I assess the type of properties from an investment or a business point of view. If I was Warren Buffett and in looking at this investment, I'd look at it, would I get a standard home or a unit or a townhouse or a dual income property if I had the choice? And a lot of people say, I want to get a cheap property so I can afford it. But again, we challenge people and say, don't look at it from an affordability, but look at it from a return. What will it make you? That's more important. That's why it's an investment. What is my return? And in fact, what if your return is greater? And in these instances here, we're just talking about properties from assuming they were paid off, just to illustrate the type of return and the difference in the profitability of an investment. But it also translates when you have the debt, because the return is greater as well. But if you looked at a standard home and it was, say, $518,000, we've got this one here. You're not going to find a home in Sydney for this price, anywhere in Sydney, really. But this is in Brisbane, in a nice estate, $580,000, getting a rent of about $440. So we've seen yield compression happen, right? So the rule used to be, if I got a place for $500,000, I get $500 a week. That's not happening now, because values are increasing and rates are low. But you're going to get about $22,000, $23,000 a year in rent. Now, your annual expenses, things like council rates, water rates, agents management fee, that's about $6,700 on this property, which is expenses as a Oh, we've got a spelling error there. Expenses there are a percentage of the rent are a third, 30%. Okay, so your net return is about $16,000 a year, or 2.9%. But if we swap over to a dual income, now this is more, but look at the yield you're getting, $860 a week or 5.7%. Now the expenses are actually quite close, because you still pay one set of council rates, you still pay the water rates and access fee and all of that. So your percentage of expenses percent of rent is only 18%. That's the standard home, it's 50% more, from 18% to 29%. But your net return is $36,000 a year on that property versus 16, so about $20,000 more, the cash flow. So from a profitability, if I was looking at this as a business, this is great. And the yield, again, your net return is 4.6%. So and people say, well, will I get great capital growth on a dual income property? I'd say to you, well, that is capital growth. If you're generating that much more income today, you can take that. That's a guaranteed capital growth, because you can take that capital return, that income return, and pay it off that debt. And you've now had capital growth because you've got more increased ownership within the property. It isn't potential, it is actually quite actual. So over time, again, that compounding return of additional cash flow is really beneficial to you, but it really then helps fulfill the objective of being financially independent, having that cash flow. And we never have clients that are too upset they're making too much money on property. No one rings me up and says, I'm really upset my property's making me too much money. Or I remember when I was doing financial planning, I've got my managed funds and my shares have gone down. That's when the issues occur. It's usually, how do I get the next one? So if you look at, again, this difference here, that net income difference between these two properties, even though one costs more, is about $20,000 a year, or $400 a week, or 127% more. But over 15 years, that's an additional $300,000. Or if you think of the standard house land package of around about that $500,000, it's a large portion of the value of that property that you're getting in additional income, simply by choosing an asset that is engineered to get a higher rental yield while you watch the land value appreciate.
That's very true.
Yeah, that's really powerful, Sam. And I think from there, it's great to go from that working example, that model of explaining, what is the strategy that we employ and working with our clients, is to really hand over now back to Lloyd and talk about a particular client you've worked with for a number of years, Lloyd, on how they went about building their portfolio.
Yeah, it's this is a really exciting portfolio, and we've done this many times for different people, but it was one we just used as an example. The great story with this particular family, he actually resigned from a pretty high pressure position, and he rang me to tell me that he'd resigned, but he also rang me to say, hey, look, I just want to thank you, because the things that we've set up on the property side of things, I don't even have to think about. They are self-generating. They actually give me an income now. So when I have given up my, my current position, and obviously earning quite a considerable amount of money, he didn't have to consider, oh, wow, I've got to go back to work because I have negatively geared properties. All right. His properties were actually self-generating. And so he could literally go to the Bahamas for 12 months and not have to worry about his properties that would pay themselves off. And so, we got one in superannuation for him. And again, that's a dual income property, and it's had quite considerable growth up there. One in Gregory Hills, and there's one very similar to this just sold recently, and I've got some figures on the next page over. But then you got Fern Bay, and obviously with Thornton, that was a duplex, and that's had incredible growth up in that particular area. And so it was strategic along the way and working this through, but the returns, if we have a look over the next page, you can see there with your Griffin property, it's had pretty substantial growth over the last few years, with it being a dual income. The great thing is that's in super as well. So when he gets to the retirement phase, or when he goes into that retirement phase in his lifestyle, and he wants to retire and he's at the right age, he can actually sell that property, and the capital gains will be capital gains tax free, simply because he's bought that within his super structure. And obviously, if you're doing that, you've got to consider checking things out with your accountant and financial planner to make sure that's set up correctly. But the one there in Gregory Hills, and all of these are two income properties. So they're either dual incomes or duplex style of properties. And so as you'll see there, your cash flow is a considerable amount. And when you look at the actual net income return, it's over, just under $7,000 a month. That's a full wage. It's actually a full wage. And I sat down with another client just recently. We did a bit of a portfolio review, and we worked out her income outside of her household income, just purely from her portfolio that she set up with us over the last 5 years, her and her husband. She was making $72,000 a year cash flow. All right. They're life-changing numbers, and this particular couple that we're using here as a scenario, you look at not just the actual cash flow that they're getting in from this, but the actual capital gains. That's a significant change to their future. And it's like I said, 82% of Australians outlive their super simply because they don't strategize. They don't plan what they're going to do in the future. This was a strategic plan that we put together for these people to actually show them how they can get to their retirement goals and obviously be financial independent, as Sam talked about earlier.
Yeah, that's fantastic, Lloyd. It's a really exciting case study. And I think it sort of goes back to that previous slide when we said, what if you can have both? And this really demonstrates that. What if you can get the capital growth advantage? What if you can get the income? And I think that's certainly evident in that case study for your customers. And they're just one of the customers we work with. I think what's important now for the people that may not be as familiar with DPN and the way that we work with our clients, I think it's really sensible now just talk through a little bit about what we do as a business and what our approach is and what makes us different. So, and I'd be happy to hand over to you, Sam, if you want to just step through this piece for the audience tonight.
Thanks, David. Yeah, look, as we said, tonight was very much information and educational, and we're using one real life case study and just some general examples. But what's really important is that people can get a specific strategy for where they're at in their stage of life. So you've got to run your own race. People with different capacities, different incomes, different responsibilities and commitments and what have you. And you really want to make sure that you know what's possible for you. So we offer a free property investment strategy, a plan that we can make for people. It doesn't cost you anything. It just allows you to get informed to find out what is suitable for you at your personal level. And that way we can model out for you, what does it look like if I do nothing? What's that trajectory look like? What happens if I add one property, 2, 3, 4? What is it I need to get? And what's the impact on that cash flow now and in the future in doing that? And then from there, after we've modeled and people go, yeah, look, I want to press ahead with a portfolio, what would be the next step? And that is really then getting their finance approved to seeing what the banks will do them. So again, we could be enthusiastic, they could be enthusiastic. It will then come down to their bank providing, or we go into a lender. We've got a whole finance broking division that will help organize the finance. But we'd also then, if they got superannuation, introduce them to some of the accountants or planners that within our network, or speak to their accountant, and then they can look at setting up the self-managed super fund, and we can organize the finance for that super fund as well. And then we help them build that portfolio from right beginning to finish. Now, to build a portfolio, for the type of products and things we're looking at, it's not something you just do in 2 months. This is generally a 12 to 18 month exercise because the products take a little bit of time. You've got to wait for the right things. We're not in a rush. We want to build the right foundation and grow it from there. But once it's established, you can do quite well. And again, some people, depending on where they're at in their commitments, they may get it going. They may just start with one property, and then within the next 2 to 3 years, add another property. And it all comes down to where they're at. But what you've got in us here is, strategists like myself and Lloyd, who've been doing this for a while, will help create a specific strategy to your own individual circumstances. But then we have the resource of our greater team, from researchers, the property contracts team, the property concierge team, the finance team, and what have you, and also our property management business, where we managed over 915 properties today. We're just about to get another book of another 450. So by the end of the financial year, we'll be up to 1,500 properties that we manage across the eastern seaboard, and that business is growing really well. We've taken our approach to managing our investment properties and actually introducing other people to the brand. But our portfolio managers for property management, they do a fantastic job. They're highly seasoned. because, in the past we would, work with some of the local agents and just their philosophy and approach to business were often juniors or people that were there, and they weren't thinking portfolio where we do think portfolio. And our clients then have one company with great cloud-based software, comprehensive reporting, can get all that information. And, just for our stats and our methodology, this would be backed up by data, is that, of the 900 properties that we've had, our vacancy rate is virtually zero. And that's after being stress tested during the worst pandemic in 100 years.
Yes,
and we lost a bit of sleep actually at the beginning of the pandemic, because in our model, we actually provided 2-year rental guarantee on our properties. And you can imagine when COVID first broke out, we of the portfolios in motion, there was about 250 or so that had rental guarantees. And we just thought, what happens if people stop paying? Well, we could be wiped out. How are we going to fund all of these rents? But thankfully, our government put some measures in and what have you. And the ironic thing is, of that, probably only about 6 to 7 customers actually asked for a rental reduction or waiver. So that was, at the time, our portfolio was about 700 last year. That was only 1% of the portfolio. And those amounts were very small. They were somewhere between $30 and $50, and only for a small period of time, probably 6 to 10 weeks or something. So it's quite small. It wasn't massive. And these people lost their jobs and what have you, and they were actually good, and they were looking to pay them rent. We had some tenants, unfortunately, who didn't lose their job and heard what was happening in the news, and they just wanted to get paying out of their rent. And we said, no, look, the message is there for people who can't pay rent, not won't pay rent. But I only just want to highlight.
Got to give them points for trying.
Yeah, that an important part is this asset will be with you for a long period of time. And as an organisation, we're not only interested in helping you get the strategy, and doing the research, but helping you get the finance, help seeing it built, established, but also managing the asset for the next couple of decades. And so, we're a full service organisation in that regard. You don't have to use us for all of those services, but we do want to provide a continuity of service to help build out that portfolio for you and manage it to, the time where you can sort of retire. I was speaking to another client today. He's not quite retiring. He's refiring. He's doing really well, but it's entirely up to you where you want to get off the exertion sort of treadmill. Thanks, David.
That's great, Lloyd and Sam. And look, I think probably from this and before I do sign off and thank you very much for your time tonight. Just a quick call out to everybody on this webinar tonight. We'll certainly take a recording of this and share this back with you. But if you did want to get in contact with our team, it is very simple. Simply just go and email us at hello@dpn.com.au. That's hello@dpn.com.au. We've got a team there of relationship managers and customer engagement specialists. They'll have a chat to you. They'll see where you are today, what your starting position is, get an understanding of what your goals and objectives are. Then set a time with you to meet with Sam or Lloyd and sit down and talk about what that strategy looks like. But really excited to have everybody here tonight. Such a great turnout. I want to personally say thank you to Sam and to Lloyd for your time and insight tonight. Even working with you, I get more inspired the more we go through these. So it's just fantastic to have the ability to share your insight on this webinar tonight.
Oh, pleasure.
So we've got some questions here, David. So
yes, for sure. Actually, one moment.
So I've got one here from Fabio, who's actually a client and just a great person that I've got to know. Yes. So Fabio's from Italy. He's a great guy. So if everyone could, if you could meet Fabio, I'd introduce him to you. So Fabio's asked here, he's a big fan of investment property and that, and he's asked the question about Warren Buffett, and we see in Australia, there's a lot of legislation that really favors property. And Fabio mentions, Warren Buffett actually says he invests in a lot of value generating companies and assets, but farms and, not so much as real estate. In my opinion, one's portfolio, what should be the percentage of assets in property versus other assets, crypto lending and all that. And as I said, look, we're not universalists in saying that, and that is meaning, what I mean by that is we're not saying we're the only way you can make money. Warren Buffett, you might say he invests in shares or stocks, but he really invests in businesses, and that's what he understands and that's what he likes. So when you talk about diversification, Warren Buffett actually doesn't diversify. He actually practices the principle of concentration, and he just invests in companies, in businesses. That's what he likes to do. So he likes to generate, but he understands that, and he keeps doing what's really good for him. And I'm more about get a strategy that works for you. The principles are portable. So if I talked about another wealthy person in Australia, a gentleman by the name of Harry Triggerboff, he's not so diversified. He's concentrated. He's the developer, but he's really an investor in disguise of Meriton, and he has 5,400 units that he owns. So he does these developments, but he actually tries to retain as much and owns them. So would you want to swap your investment portfolio for his, even though you're not diversified with a little bit of shares and a little bit of crypto or whatever it may be? Great, you could do that. But if you want to, you can, invest in a little bit of stocks and shares and that. I guess the difference with property in Australia and what you can do is that you can leverage quite a lot. You can put down 10% of your cash or your equity and borrow up to 9 times. And it's very stable and flexible in doing that. And it really just comes down to your asset approach. So I've got some clients that do a bit of stocks, they do a bit of crypto, peer-to-peer lending, whatever it may be that you want to do. We're not here to dictate strategies to people or tell them what they should do. We have a bias towards property. And the reason is because the clientele people come to us want a really passive approach, whereas the other approach is investing in businesses, and you just got to have the skill set to do it. I've known some people over the years that, and even within the property sector, do different. They buy and renovate properties, but that's more of a business versus an investment because it's active. It requires your time. So really, at the end of the day, I think I'm not here to tell people what different asset classes they should invest in. I do say to people, you should invest, understand what you're investing in, and it's entirely up to you what mixture you want to go to. As long as you're knowledgeable and have a strategy for it, and you want to allocate that percentage, that's something you could either work out with yourself or a financial planner and that. But often, if you get the right people and the experts in each individual field, you can do really well. So I hope I've answered your question. Then I've got Ravi here who's, asking about NDIS, that better than dual income property. Very different type of property. And we do have a specialist disability accommodation business. And again, it is a business versus an investment because it's not a passive investment. The reason I know is we've got 6 staff in that business. We pay them money.
It takes a lot of time to work it.
There's a lot of compliance involved, and it's
very true.
If you think of it as almost a hospital where you can build a hospital, but there's the cost of running a hospital and you need the experts in there to run it. So unfortunately, a lot of people have entered into or seen a lot of advertisements spruiking NDIS or specialist disability accommodation. They think, and they've gone on the government websites and seen the amount of income that's available. But the government doesn't give you all that money just because they want to waste taxpayers' money and hand it over. There's a lot of people that have been burned already in NDIS. A lot of people jumped into apartments thinking they're going to make it. At the moment, the vacancy rate in NDIS in apartments is about 50%. That is punishing for someone who's invested in an apartment. And this includes even some large fund managers like Macquarie Bank and what have you. So what's happened is it's not just about building a property. It's about getting the tenants in NDIS, and that's what it's really about. It's a very unique sector. The government's still building capacity around getting approvals for plans, and in fact, they are actually denying people living in 1 or 2 bedroom units, and only really focusing on group homes. So I would say that's a very, very unique sector. It is not just a standard investment property. It is more of a business. And the operators, the people are spruiking out there, aren't providing the guaranteed rental income stream. They're promising the high returns. They don't have the silver provider and the support independent living provider backing up the not guaranteeing the rent and that. So I would be very, very cautious. Unless someone is guaranteeing that income stream, you carry a huge amount of risk and a huge amount of exposure. And
you can sit there with an overpriced property too.
Overcapitalized, because you do have to overcapitalize to get that return. Exactly, and you also run the risk as the operator. You have to make sure you've got 24-hour report or be able to report any incident to that individual within 24 hours. So it is very active, and you need an SDA operator. And there's a lot of people just starting out. So I would say it's a high risk property investment, not a low risk. That's why the returns are high. High risk, high return. But it's not necessarily a free return of high income. It requires work. And Tim here, what suburbs in the Southwest corridor do you see the best investment opportunity in the next 10 or 15 years? Lloyd, maybe you can answer that.
Look, I think in Sydney, you've got to look at, there's some specific areas that have probably hit their point of affordability for several years. I think that Southwest has really gone crazy in the last few months, specifically. I mean, you look at that Thirlmere, Tamor kind of area, since Christmas, it's jumped $100,000 for a block of land. And but I think down near it's some areas down south, down near Wollongong and those particular areas. I think up north, around the Newcastle Maitland area, I think you've got to find the right spot, because you can literally miss it by a suburb. And this is what most people don't understand. I think, oh, if I go to, Wollongong's the third most expensive city in Australia, but is it the whole of Wollongong that is going crazy in that Illawarra area? I think you've got to be very specific when you actually go suburb by suburb, because you really can miss it if you go to the wrong suburb. And so we use a lot of research, as David said earlier, that we've got researchers that actually work for us, and so there's a lot of insight that we get through having those people. But I think south is a great area. There's some really good little spots down there. Cheap, it's not cheap by any means. Price wise, everything's gone up.
But I'd probably still say where there's some value, where we sort of have a nexus there between the land value, the build cost, and the rental yield.
Correct,
Tim, just to really be specific around that southwest corridor. Had you spoken to us about 3 to 4 years ago, you could see in the case study there, we had a place around Gregory Hills or Currans Hill and what have you, and those properties were around that 660 to
820, 830,
early eights, and they're all up over $1 million now. So yet the yields haven't increased much at all. So you're going to lean a bit more on the capital growth in those areas. The yield is not as much. So we really believe around that Picton area, Wollondilly, where you're still around probably the early eights, and the yields are quite good.
Yeah,
and
still doing
it would be if you sort of correlated that to similar to areas around the northwest of Sydney, such as Rouse Hill, Box Hill, Riverstone, where in Riverstone now you're buying a block for 300 square meters and a small home for close to $1 million. The land value per square meter rate in the Wollondilly Shire is the best value in Sydney. And if you think of the commerce that is happening around both the Macarthur region, the southwestern Sydney airport, Aerotropolis, and the business that's happening around there, and then Wollongong's beaches, southwestern corridor, Wollondilly, I believe, is a great opportunity. And there's a significant town centre that's getting built there. And it'll be essentially where Campbelltown was 10, 15 years ago. Campbelltown had a stigma of being, not a desirable place to go there now, but your houses there are 1.3 to 1.5 to million now. That's commonplace just in Campbelltown, which, if you went a decade and a half ago, people would probably say Macarthur, wouldn't really think about it, but now it's really transformed. And so you see gentrification, you see culture, you see services, you see art galleries, beautiful botanical gardens out that area and what have you. So quite interesting. Yeah.
The transport link, even for they've built through that corridor back into the CBD, and obviously working arrangements have changed, but that whole area now it's faster to get from that Campbelltown region into the CBD than it is, the Sutherland Shire or, the Upper North Shore. So
exactly, yeah. So anything that's around that, Liverpool radius, but the value mix that we see from an income and a growth point of view is the Wollondilly area. So again, hopefully, Tim, that's answered your question.
And it all comes down to the individual's personal affordability and getting that best return you can for that particular property. That's great. Well, that's a number of questions there, and we really welcome those questions. And I apologise that on my screen those questions didn't pop up. So Sam, thank you for grabbing onto those before we did sign off. Very comprehensive. We're going to send everyone a recording of tonight's webinar. We encourage you to share this with your friends, family, and colleagues. And we welcome the opportunity to chat with you in person. Please, as we said, simply drop us a note, hello@dpn.com.au. We're really looking forward to speaking with you. And again, I just want to say thank you very much to Sam and Lloyd tonight for your insight and anecdotes and for sharing the great stories that, helping people live the life they want.